Whenever I do research, there's a lot I find that never makes it into the final video. Sometimes it's unrelated, sometimes it slows the pace down too much, and most often, I would basically need an entire mini video to explain all the context that goes into it. And I usually tell people I cut stuff, but I've gotten questions about it basically since my first video, which currently sits at just under 3 hours long, but originally was just over 4. So since it takes so long for me to get content out, I figure I'll make a new series called Cut Cont, where I go through stuff that almost made it into my most recent video. This one's free, as a thank you to everyone who enjoyed the last video. I was really overwhelmed, honestly, by the support it got. And it's also free because it works as an ad, let's be real. And what I mean by ad is for all future videos in this series, you'll either need to be a channel member on YouTube or subscribe to me on Patreon. People have been asking me to set one up forever, and I never felt comfortable paywalling entire videos or being like, you get to watch it early, because what that actually means is just everyone else gets to watch it late. But I like this. This is stuff that I wouldn't even bother putting out anyway, and now you all can see it. You get a little more content from me, I get a little more money from you, and the economy keeps spinning. Now, if I just threw all the content I cut at you, it really wouldn't make much sense, and it would also probably be boring. So instead, what I'm going to do is give a little intro before each section, often explaining either why it got cut, giving a little more context if it was needed, or anything else along those lines. If you ever wanted a little more insight into my editing process, well, this is the series for you. I think we'll kick this off with a bit that I ended up cutting because it had nothing to do with the theme of the video. It was a total tangential aside, but it did offer pretty good insight into how wide a net I cast during my research. In fact, in something I found very funny, if you broke down Obama's second election by education group, the only one he actually lost was college educated. If you're wondering how and why I bothered to look that up, well, it's because I was trying to figure out something completely different, namely, did college make kids more liberal? I think that's very much the common knowledge, but I was curious what the actual data said. And if you look at the actual data between 2004 and 2015, you can see that liberals gained a whole 2 points. Consistently liberal shot up the most, but in terms of mostly liberal and consistently, the combined total stayed about the same. Whereas if you compare that to consistently conservative and mostly conservative, that shot up a whopping 8 points between 2004 and 2015. So anyway, that is a little bit of insight into how my research works with a total non sequitur. It'd be really funny if Google decided to put an ad here. Next is a lot more from the contact between the Biden administration and social media companies during COVID. There's honestly even more than this that I could say. I wanted to include more than this, but when I was watching it back, I kind of worried that I was going to be driving away some of the people I wanted to hear this the most. Because again, I don't think the point is whether or not the vaccines are safe and effective. I believe they are, obviously. I took it and I've been boosted, blah, blah, blah. But that really wasn't what I wanted to focus on. Maybe someday I'll make a video on that. But really the thing I wanted to focus on was how the social media companies spun fairly routine contact as something negative. I'm sure if you're familiar with the story at all, you're also aware that the Biden administration specifically reached out to Facebook about them not cracking down on misinformation around the vaccine. But if you read the actual documents, the story you find is way darker. Facebook had publicly announced a policy change that they would be removing anti-vaccine content in February of 2021, and that same day sent an email to the White House informing them as well. In response, Rob Flaherty, Biden's director of digital strategies, responded with a rather muted email, asking for data on how exactly they plan to do this. This led to various meetings, where the White House wanted to get a sense of what exactly Facebook was doing and see if they couldn't get any data from them. Can you give us a sense on the volume on these, and some metrics around the scale of removal for each? Can you also give us a sense of misinformation that might be falling outside your removal policies? In March, Facebook told the White House it was, quote, in a lockdown on COVID misinfo. The White House was supposedly interested about this, but when Facebook couldn't give specifics, became frustrated. Facebook, on the other hand, reprimanded their employees for even saying that and asked them to walk back the statement. In early April, Flaherty grew frustrated and explicitly stated he was trying to simply get data so he could explain the problem to people. That the problem was, quote, misinfo on the internet, bigger problem than Facebook. going on to say, "I don't even care about the specific methodology. You have better, richer data than we'll ever have. I need to know what the theory of the case is, where we can be most effective. If you don't want to give information, just say that. I don't want to feel like I'm going to a dog and pony show." A few days later, Facebook would find out some of their employees were reaching out to the White House direct, sharing internal conversations, suggesting Facebook snow the White House with positive data to avoid sharing the negative data they actually wanted. At this point, direct communication slowed significantly. This next section was one I went back and forth on cutting several times, because even though I think this one piece of information actually is kind of important and significant, I already felt like the Thiel section was overly long, and I felt like spending too much time on Thiel worked against my whole point of you shouldn't view Thiel as the mastermind. Part of the issue is because so many people view him that way, there's just more information out there, so it's easier to draw those conclusions because you have more to work with. That obviously leads to me having a longer section on him, but then I worried spending too much time on him was going to feed into that machine. When I looked more and more, I found he had many losses. I found that things didn't work out for him a lot, that he was even in conflict with a lot of these people, and that ultimately the regulatory environment that these tech companies were building to go after other big tech companies, as much as Thiel might have started it, he was not the sole reason it was operating, even at this point. It also didn't add much to what I wanted to be the focus of this section, that Thiel blazed the trail that others merely followed. You'll note, when I talk about the contracts, I don't mention any lawsuits, so I firmly believe Palantir would have gotten these contracts even without the regulatory environment Thiel helped create. As much as Peter Thiel is often credited with being an early supporter of Donald Trump, the truth is he held off on supporting him until basically the last possible second. In the primaries, Thiel threw all his weight behind Carly Fiorina. But when Trump secured the nomination, Thiel endorsed him, notably at his speech at the RNC that year.
"I'm not a politician, but neither is Donald Trump. He is a builder, and it's time to rebuild America."
Thiel would profit pretty early from being one of Trump's early supporters. In 2017, the budget included a provision written by Duncan Hunter that the Army had to stop developing their in-house DCGS until they examined publicly available software. And if you recall, the specific thing Hunter wanted to push was Palantir. This would lead to Palantir getting that contract in 2018, and their defense contracts didn't stop there. In 2017, the Defense Department launched Project Maven, which was meant to integrate machine learning algorithms into various intelligence and military applications. I'll note, this was not the DCGS thing Palantir was about to secure. Though there's no documentation on the bidding process for obvious reasons, the contract was first awarded to Google, although due to protests from their employees, they eventually decided to forego the contract, which meant Palantir was free to come in and scoop it up the following year. Thiel would keep most of these contracts under Biden as well. Recall the flack Biden got for including so many tech people on his transition team. Palantir was not publicly traded until 2020, so we don't really have a great view of their finances before that point. But the rest of the tech sector must have at least had an idea. They all hang out and talk together all the time. In fact, here's a great photo of them all having dinner together. They're on an island, by the way. Yeah, that one. And in case you thought that would be the end of Thiel's greed, that same year, the Pentagon brought in Anduril, which is another AI company Thiel helped found, which is far more focused on specific military applications, especially facial recognition and use of force. This next section is one that I cut for something that's a lot more common than you might expect. I had a theory. I thought I had a lot of evidence that sort of backed up that theory. And normally how my research works is I'll go read something, I'll see what's there, write up the story, shoot it, do that whole thing. And then I look at the evidence again when I'm putting together the companion document. And sometimes when I do that, I go, ooh, I made a slight misstep here. Ooh, I don't actually think there's enough evidence to support this. And then I end up kind of trying to cut around it. Essentially, it's a retelling of the fight between Thiel and Zuck over COSA that highlights a lot of the friction the two men had experienced over the years. But when you combine this with events they've been at together, how they treat each other in public, and even the deals they still have with each other's companies to this day, I didn't quite feel confident saying this anymore, so I went back to what my original analysis had been in the video. As much as you can find many articles talking about how close Zuck and Thiel were, it's also clear there had been some tension between the two in the past. Thiel told Zuck to sell Facebook early on, claiming it wasn't going to go very far. Zuck had even asked Thiel to step down in 2017 over his support of Trump, Thiel refused, which was lucky for Zuck because in 2019, it leaked that Zuck attended a dinner with Trump and Thiel, at which a deal was brokered by which Trump would ease up on some of his lawsuits against Facebook in return for more favorable coverage on the site. But come 2021, Trump is no longer in power, and the Facebook files revealed that Facebook selected for time spent on the platform above all else. Then suddenly Thiel steps down from the board, and this article comes out saying he was at odds with the rest of the company about that specific policy. Convenient, no?
In retrospect, this next section should have been included in the video. I kind of think I did everyone a little bit of a disservice by taking it out. I wanted this video to express that corporations are not as powerful as they like us to think they are, that they don't control our government with lobbying, that they're trying to do a lot of things to get there, and that in doing so, they're kind of screwing themselves. But I just think that I didn't express that one particular point well enough. I do think there's a lot of people, and the tough thing is I don't know if all of them watched the video because I'm not going to check everyone's watch time. But to be fair, I didn't do much here other than just simply state that. So hopefully I can fix this slightly in the follow-up. But I do feel like a lot of people walked away just thinking I was saying corporations have a lot of power in the government, which, I mean, yeah, of course, at that point, everyone knows that. When I'm looking into things like this, I genuinely have 3 rules. Or, to put it better, I think that only 3 things ever happen. People kill people, people have sex with people, and people steal money. If you give me a conspiracy theory that does not fit one of those 3, I'm going to be more skeptical of it than I would otherwise. When I was researching this story, what I kept seeing was this super scary, insurmountable shadow government forming. The techno-fascists, as everyone keeps putting it. And that's part of it. They want you to think they're that strong, but they're not. It's the same thing with that video that I swear I'll get around to at some point about democracy actually working, and democracy working very much as intended. We are at this weirdly unprecedented time where so many people are convinced democracy doesn't work. You know who benefits in a world where there's no democracy? People who have a bunch of money and don't care who the person in charge is. I also think at the end of the day, human nature, our natural instincts are incredibly strong. I frankly think you could destroy society overnight and we'd be able to rebuild it. That's the belief I have in the strength of the human spirit. So whenever I think about these overarching shadow organizations, I know deep down in my heart of heart, even if those organizations exist, they're never going to win. Ever. Maybe they might be on top for a short period of time, but they will fall. Because at the end of the day, you can't control people forever. Now look, I know a lot of this probably feels depressing as we get here. If you feel like that right now, that's a normal reaction. And frankly, it's one I have had, not just when I was writing and researching, but even as I was filming it. But I also want you to know that is exactly how these people want you to feel. This next section, believe it or not, I actually went back and forth on even including in the cut content version. This was originally a disclaimer I had at the top of the Peter Thiel section where I talked about kind of how I do my research and why my scripts can feel a little all over the place as a result. And why I wanted you to not view Thiel as the mastermind and how I sympathized with you if you did view him that way. Because to be fair, I viewed him as the mastermind a bunch when I was in my research. Anyway, I did too much preamble. This is what it was. I think it can be tricky sometimes when I'm only showing people my end product to also make them aware of what it's like for me when I'm researching these kinds of stories. Very rarely at the outset do I know what the big picture of the story is going to be. Often I have an idea, and pretty much every single time up until now, that idea has been wrong. It's rare I understand the whole shape of a story early on. In fact, I rarely even grasp the main thread until after several weeks of 8-hour days researching. And even then, usually it still takes a draft or 2 of my script before I can kind of see it. The problem is, by the time I finally grasp the main thread, I have looked up so much information because I don't have a teacher. I don't have someone over my shoulder kind of shaping and guiding my research. It becomes so difficult to whittle all the information down into something that's digestible, and not just digestible, but engaging. So I'm not just simply recording me just kind of rambling for 5 hours. Don't comment that that's what my videos are anyway. If I have a story I want people to be aware of, I have to play to the algorithm just like everyone else. In my earlier drafts, Peter Thiel was a very big part of this story, and I kept him with us every step of the way. But I realized that when I did that, it was so difficult to not see Peter Thiel the way I had seen him very early in my research. The first few weeks I was researching, I saw Thiel everywhere, and he was the secret mastermind controlling everything. He's connected to Musk. They both did PayPal together. And via PayPal, he's connected to a bunch of other people as well. He's part of OpenAI. He was one of the earliest investors of Facebook. You know, like he's everywhere in this story. Because when I was researching, that was the story that was being fed to me. But what I have found through my research is that lens couldn't be more wrong. But no matter how much I rewrote Peter Thiel's section, I realized there's simply no way I can tell you his part of the story without you seeing that too. He's just in too many places. He's at the right place at the right time so often. But I, Andrew, the guy making this video, really need to hammer this home before we get to the next section. Thiel is not the mastermind. All of this is not happening because of Thiel. He wants you to think that. In fact, it's very important to him that you think that. But as you'll see as we go through it, he's not. Thiel's just lucky. He just got to the party first. He found the door before anyone else. Now, being the first guy to the party and finding the door that no one else has found yet, those are still very impressive things that are very difficult to do. He is lucky, but luck is just when skill meets opportunity. He was able to take advantage of the situations in front of him. But you shouldn't think of this as him orchestrating all these things. And I'll remind you, on the other side of that door, the thing we are talking about is access to US government money, your and my tax dollars, and also bonds and investments and various other things. It's not, tax dollars aren't the only thing, but tax dollars are a lot of it. And while you may think, well, what does it matter? I mean, if they're providing a service for the government, surely they deserve to get paid for that service. I think you'll find as we go through it, that's about as charitable as me saying, what does it matter what they did on that island? It's normal to cut loose when you're on vacation. This is a little bit recursive, but this next section is something I cut telling you about stuff that didn't even make it into the script. Essentially a short disclaimer about a lot of the gambling stuff that Trump has been allowing, which I think is slightly different from how a lot of people talk about it, so I wanted to include it here anyway. And from what I found, Trump isn't just opening up the books to the highest bidder. He has various interests that he prefers over others. He has friends that he wants to reward over others. And he has enemies he wants to court over others. There's a lot of moving parts here, and it'd be foolish to look at the American president, arguably the single most powerful position on earth, and claim that only one interest group is controlling him. One group that has tracked many of Trump's investigations have found that a third of all fraud cases against crypto and gambling companies have just been closed. Not they've been tried or they've been found there's not enough evidence. They just are told to drop the case. And so they do. And I don't even have time to get into all the shenanigans going on with the prediction markets. And by the way, I don't even mean the fact that they exist. I mean how Trump plays favorites with the prediction markets and allows some to exist while not allowing others to exist, and it seems like a lot of that has to do with how much they bought into Trump coin. But hey, what do I know? I cut this next section for two reasons. One, with the rant, I ended up keeping at the end. It felt a little much on top of everything else. And two, I thought I dipped a toe a little too far into ideologies, which is a lot more of what the second video is going to focus on, so I wanted to leave that for that. Recall, Trump and J.D. Vance have delivered numerous speeches to European leaders where they have attacked them for not upholding the shared values of our civilization. Oftentimes, those shared values get boiled down to just free speech, even though, just to be clear, the EU doesn't have free speech. In fact, I mean, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly certain America is like literally the only country in the world that has freedom of speech enshrined in the law. And forgive me, but if you have a cultural norm that's not enshrined in the law, I'm not going to give that much weight. Further, Trump's tariffs on EU countries are, in part, from his own words, due to their unfair targeting of American tech companies. That's right, it's not just favorable domestic policies big tech is getting. They're also getting favorable foreign policies. Foreign policies designed to put pressure on foreign governments to make an easier business environment for these American companies. Which, look, again, I'm a liberal. I'm a capitalist. I love capitalism. That feels gross to me. You're your own sovereign country. You have the right to set the business conditions of your own country. But weirdly, this situation is actually far more complicated than people give it credit for. Because I think often it's held up as, oh, well, the EU just decided to fine these companies. Or from the more charitable interpretation, well, the EU realized there were violations in progress and decided to fine these American companies. Just to be clear, neither of those is quite correct. Most of the actions that the EU has taken thus far came from complaints. And this final section was cut because at the time I felt like it was superfluous, that I'd already made the point that big tech was infighting more than they are collectively seizing control of the government. Musk did not have the revenue model Facebook had already set up, so it wouldn't hurt his business that much. However, it would hurt Facebook's business. In the end, that's what this feuding was about. It was about business. It was about money. It wasn't two guys trying to make beef or trying to get attention on the internet. It was two guys who actually had some very serious personal issues related to how they were attacking each other's companies. So let me now pose a question to you. Let's say that actually everything I've said up until now is wrong, and that truly the number one threat these tech companies face is actually their regulatory environment. Okay? Let's say that's the case. Now, let me tell you the solution is giving them tax breaks. How does that help the underlying problem? It's the same logic with tariffs. People always talk about, oh, who pays the tariffs? Who pays the tariffs? You know, it's at the end of the day, it's the customer. No, the person who pays the tariffs is the importer, and the importer is a retailer. They are someone who is buying something from another country and selling it in the U.S., either directly to the consumer or to someone else that they then make something with that. So if your argument is that tariffs are going to keep manufacturing on U.S. shores, how does making retailers pay money to the U.S. government keep manufacturing local? You're not driving up the price of manufacturing. Raw goods, maybe, but certainly not manufacturing. You're driving up the cost of retail sales. There is currently a mad scramble to grab everything in the US government that isn't nailed down. And that money isn't going to oil. It's not going to agriculture. And it sure as hell isn't going to social programs. No, what it's going to is tech. Now, this isn't all the content I cut. When I look at my timeline where I put the sections I removed from my video that I may or may not put back in, which, yes, I call orphans, it's about an hour. But some of those are far too short, like this. Technically, Section 230 was an amendment added in '94 from the Communications Decency Act. Some are redundant, like this. I mean, after all, if you are on the board, technically what you have is a fiduciary responsibility. There is a genuine legal requirement that you are supposed to try and make money. And some are parts of other sections which just don't really make sense out of context, even if I could do some sort of intro. And in 2020, the DoD actually changed the bidding process, adopting what's known as the adaptive acquisition framework, which, to complete the cycle, would lead to them ending their contract with Microsoft voluntarily in 2021. But there you go. That's the pitch for my Patreon/channel membership. $5 a month. YouTube was trying to have me make it 25, but I'm not doing that. I will probably always keep them to this level of production value because I don't want them to slow me down too much. Doing this probably adds a couple of days in between videos, but it's not adding like 2 weeks or something. So I like if I can keep it at like this level. And hey, if I ever get good enough at the script that I don't have any cut content,
fear not, I'll just tell you stuff that I found on my research that didn't make it into the video. Like, here's a fun one, actually. If you're around my age and terminally online, you might remember the Vaping Congressman, the guy who vaped on the House floor and then got indicted for spending campaign funds on Steam games. I remember reading about that and being like, based. I mean, you know, he shouldn't be doing that, but it's a congressman I can get behind. Well, anyway, that was Duncan Hunter, so the Palantir plant in the Republican Party. And yeah, he wasn't spending it on Steam games. He sent it to his son, who was at boarding school, and his son spent it on Steam games. He also spent it on like LL Bean jackets and trips for him and his family, and kind of like Starbucks runs, just like a personal piggy bank. It was really bad. It was way worse than the headline made it sound. On top of that, when he vaped in Congress, he was doing so to protest the banning of vapes on airplanes, which maybe for some smaller rigs I could see we should allow it, but especially for some of the bigger rigs, like, no, we shouldn't be allowing those on airplanes. And this is coming from a guy who smoked cigarettes for years. And that kind of turned me on to a whole other thing that I also never even made it into the script, but there was this woman, Holly Finn. Well, I did mention her in the video. She wrote like a couple articles for the Wall Street Journal and a few others that were all strangely positive of tech companies in these weird kind of sideways ways. And a lot of Gizmodo articles I also saw were like leaks from specific tech companies in specific ways. TechCrunch too, I think, was another one. And that made me wonder if there wasn't like a bunch of tech people leaking to the press stories that they wanted them to tell, which then established these relationships, which allowed them to eventually do kind of spin stuff, which is interesting. It's a really interesting thing for me to think about. But I didn't end up looking into it too much because there wasn't a whole lot on Holly Finn. And once I couldn't go deeper than that, I just kind of gave up and moved on to the next thing. So if nothing was cut, it'll be stuff like that, where I'll just kind of talk to the camera about it. Also, yeah, that's what happens, by the way. It's funny. Everything fell off. Like, everything's like coming off the wall, honestly, which is great. I'm not going to be able to fix that in post. Damn. So check it out if you want, but I wanted to make sure I wouldn't be gatekeeping my content because, again, I do want people to access the high-quality stuff I put out. And if you want to support me, hey, here's what you get. You get some behind-the-scenes stuff. You're purchasing the special features DVD of my channel. That's basically what you're doing. So if you want more stuff or you just want to support the channel, by all means. And if you don't care about that and you just want to listen to my deep dives, I promise I'm never going to paywall any of my stuff like that. I don't know. If I get big enough, a TV show picks me up, whatever, that's a separate thing. But on YouTube, I'm not going to paywall whole videos. That feels wrong to me. Appreciate it if you made it this far. If you didn't, you're not hearing this, so I can say whatever I want. But I appreciate you anyway. Yep, all I got. Love you. Take care.